Welcome to a community update from the Department of Senior Affairs. I'm your host, Ed Nunez, and today's topic of the show is safety for seniors, crime prevention, and with us to discuss that is Steve Sink, manager of the APD Crime Prevention Unit. And Steve, you know, we talked about safety for seniors, but really, you know, we talked about before the show, the things we're going to talk about are safety and concerns for everybody, because I don't think that you mentioned that to me. You just don't limit it to seniors. These are concerns for everybody.
Absolutely. They're relevant to everyone in our community, so hopefully we can spread the word.
And that's what we want to do here. I think the thing that you asked me about 2 weeks ago before we got this show, going was, what was it that caused me to call Tasia Martinez, who's the public information officer for Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Police Department, and I'd seen a report about some senior crime at Bear Canyon, not crime in the center, but some seniors had been victimized by some kind of fraud, or I don't know what it was. But I think that just kind of got me thinking, about safety in general, safety for seniors, safety. This show is centered around senior issues and senior affairs, but as you said, it's a broad spectrum here. And we'll be talking about that. And I guess the couple of things, and you came up with these questions: safety in public. What are some things to remember while citizens are out in public, whether out walking in their neighborhood, shopping, things like that? Because, you want to be aware of a lot of things. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think you can break it down into some very fundamental concepts that are easy for everybody to follow. When you're out in public, I think the very first thing you need to do is be aware of your surroundings. We hear that all the time. Just be aware that there's activity around you, and kind of just pay attention to that. The second thing is trust your instincts. What a lot of people don't do, or what a lot of people might do, is they might see something in a given environment. It might even get their attention, and they might be thinking, well, that's kind of odd, and they essentially ignore what their gut instinct is saying. And so if we could put it into three fundamental concepts: be aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, but then follow through, do something about it if your gut is talking to you. And one of the primary ways to do that is, first, just give some general thought to what's normal behavior in a given environment. I mean, if you could give some general definition to what's normal, then maybe we could look at anything that doesn't meet that definition of normal as potentially suspicious. We're going to talk here in a little bit about the residential environment and what might be normal in a residential environment. Well, very simply, where you live, you are literally the experts on normal behavior, and I'm going to follow up on that here in just a little bit, but you know the faces of your neighbors, you know what kind of vehicles they drive, you kind of know when they come and go, so you're the ones that need to start paying attention when there's other folks in your immediate area. But in a parking lot, out in public, let's define normal behavior in a parking lot. I'm going to assume, Ed, that you don't do much loitering in parking lots. Right. Is that true?
Exactly.
Well, that's good.
No, sir.
And I don't either, but normal behavior, what we might typically do is find a parking stall, get out of our vehicle and go in and shop. We come back to our vehicle, we back out and we leave. That's normal. So if we see anything other than anything that might not meet that definition, maybe someone's hanging out in a parking lot, maybe someone is panhandling in a parking lot. It doesn't meet normal, so we saw that. We were aware of our surroundings. We're saying to ourselves, that's not right in this particular environment because it's not normal behavior. And so what are we going to do when we see that? I want everyone to do something about that, follow through in some ways. If that person that they're seeing in the parking lot is over by their vehicle, the follow through might simply be, don't go over there. Don't continue that path to your vehicle because you're going to come in contact with this person. We take another route, go around. One of the things that I do, Ed, is if I see someone panhandling or hanging out in a parking lot, I take a couple extra minutes and go back into the store. I want to let the people that own that property understand that they've got some issues out in their parking lot. In other words, I want them to go out and deal with this, right, and not have to rely and not make the average citizen, be completely responsible for what's going on out there. So that's one little thing. Maybe we could get on the phone if we see someone looking down into cars. Parking lots are a target-rich environment. Maybe folks go out there to break into vehicles, auto burglary, and that kind of thing. But I had mentioned that parking lots are target-rich environments. One of the things that we're seeing is that there's a lot of strong-arm robberies at various times in various places of the city, and most every strong-arm robbery is simply a purse snatch. And so what I try to teach people to do is look at crime and the world that we live in a very basic way. Visualize a triangle, if you might. There are three things that every crime must have in order to be committed. The first thing is a target. That there must be a target for a crime to be committed. The second thing is there must be an opportunity. And the third thing is someone needs to be motivated to commit a crime. With property crimes, Ed, you know this, it's usually attributed to the addiction of three things, heroin, meth, and crack. And that's just kind of one of the things that's changed our world. So if the purse could be looked at as the target, and if the opportunity is someone's walking in the parking lot and not paying attention to their surroundings, like we had previously mentioned, then they're going to be more apt to be a potential target for a crime. So conversely, if we could get women to stop carrying a purse in public, we're removing the visible target. And if we could get them to be a little bit more aware of their surroundings, they're reducing the opportunity of being a victim of a crime. And so therefore, they've already created a safer, more secure environment. I just think that's the way to do it. I talk to a lot of folks, and especially some of the older population. They grew up in a time when they didn't have to worry about these things. Now they do. I don't think we live in a bad world, Ed. I just think it's different than it used to be. So let's think about changing some habits and routines. They used to be able to carry a purse to the grocery store anytime they wanted to, and it was never an issue back several decades ago. Today, it's just something to think about. And so going to the grocery store, maybe they need a driver's license to get there and some form of payment like a debit card. They can easily conceal those things. If they want to keep a purse, I would first empty it and take all the things out that could make them a victim of identity theft, and maybe leave it in the trunk of their vehicle. But when they're stepping out of a car into a parking lot, that's the moment in time I'm most concerned about. And so to reiterate, let's remove targets from view, and let's reduce opportunities by seeing things, sensing them, and doing something about it. And again, I think we just create a safer, more secure environment. How you and I can look after each other is when we do see something that doesn't fit, let's get on the phone and notify law enforcement. 911, 242 COPS, our non-emergency number, kind of depends on the set of circumstances, but that's one way that you and I can look after each other's family. Let's report things when we see them.
You brought up a lot of great points there, and it's funny that you mentioned the property offenders, because I think they just came out yesterday, the pictures of the property offenders that most wanted by the Albuquerque Police Department.
It was in the paper this morning.
Right. I think one of the things that I want to ask, and you mentioned the triangle, you mentioned a lot of different things about not becoming a victim and doing different things and things like that. I got to ask you this, percentage-wise, it seems to me, now, you mentioned decades earlier it wasn't like that, and it wasn't. But to me, it seems like there's certainly a lot more panhandling, a lot more loitering going around. I see that every day, even by my place of employment. I've noticed an increase. While the Walmarts that we frequent, not all of them, again, but I think every place has that their share of that. Steve, and there's reasons why. New Mexico, poverty breeds a lot of things. I don't think you would disagree with that. You mentioned the addictions to heroin, crack, and meth, and those certainly are a problem here. It's not, like you said, it's not a bad world that we live in, but it's a different one, to be aware of the things that you talked about. So again, some people, awareness, I get worried about my wife when she goes out at night. She's a petite woman, and I get worried a lot.
Panhandling is an issue, Ed, and I agree with that. And I think there's some very definitive things that we can do.
Okay.
Well, first of all, we have to understand that many of the panhandlers, the homeless, the transient population, not all, but many do suffer some mental health issues. And they're not always able to tap into the resources available. I'm not saying they're bad people, Ed. I'm just saying sometimes they're put in a bad situation through drug addiction, mental health issues. And so let's not worry so much about why they're out on the street or in the parking lots panhandling. Let's just look at what it is. I think that there's more of a potential hazard when confronting or being exposed in situations like that. So I think the very first thing that you do is, again, go back to, is it normal to stand or loiter or panhandle in a parking lot? And if we see that, I don't want people to walk by that potential risk. and maybe they say, no, thank you, I don't have any money today. Okay, that's one thing, but we can't anticipate the kind of reaction that person might have,
Right.
and there is the rub. So to make it simple as possible, let's avoid that contact. If we have our head up when we're walking and we see that person up there, take another route. Just simply don't go by that potential risk. And some people will say, well, if you're hungry, let me go buy you something. And that's not a prudent thing to do, in my opinion, because more times than not, the reason they're asking for money it's not necessarily true. Maybe they say they're hungry. Maybe they say they need some assistance for their children. Maybe they say they need gasoline to get home. I just think it's a ruse to get, because really what they're asking for is to put cash money in their hands. And they're going to do it for a variety of reasons. We mentioned 3, the addiction of those 3 drugs. And so I just think that they're not being completely honest, plus the fact that we can't tell how potentially dangerous they might be. Listen, if the average citizen wants to help them in their situation, Albuquerque, the city, our community has wonderful ways to help out the transient, the folks that need help. And so I would say, you want to really help them, go write a check. Go donate to one of these wonderful organizations that their sole purpose is to assist them. And I think that's what you do. I think that's the best way to handle it.
You know, you brought up a good point there, because I remember a couple of years ago I got hit by one of those ruses. This guy asked me, you know, hey, I need some gas money, and you know, I live in Santa Fe, and you know, it's that story. And I remember because he got me. So you know, 2 weeks later, I'm seeing him. He's got the same story. He doesn't remember my face. And you know, he got me first time. But I think one of the things that you said was important, because there's a lot of people. Let's face it, New Mexicans are some of the most generous people in the world. I'll still say that. I've lived here all my life, and I love this place. I love this state, and they're very generous. And there's people that are going to say, when you're hit with the ruse, like, oh, my kid, or their first thought is like, hey, wow, that's, you know. So just go through that again, because you know, I don't know if you have percentages on those stories, that most of them are just like you said, a ruse, and people need to remember that.
That's exactly right. You know, we're all humanitarians to some degree, and we've got wonderful people in this city and state. I agree completely with that. And when you see someone in need, your gut instinct, your first reaction is to help them. And I'm just suggesting that maybe what they're saying isn't necessarily accurate, that if you really do want to help out the people in need in this community, there are many, many ways to do that. Let's not take it for what it necessarily is, which could be considered a potential scam. If they're telling you something like the gasoline need or whatever, then yeah, that wasn't an honest approach to you. And so in some ways we can call that a scam, and we're going to be talking about that here in just a little bit. So that's just one thing to think about. Just because someone says something doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate, and if you truly want to help, there's multiple ways to do that.
So think about a different way to do that. And I think the other question I have for you is, you and I, you know, we're pretty confident people. You know, you've been in situations, I've been in situations where I'm not going to really shirk away from things. Neither are you. We're not looking for any trouble, but you know, we're not probably going to run from most situations. But there's other people that, you know, the panhandlers, whoever is looking for that triangle victim, see people come out and see the body language right away. You know, they see it. They just can prey on the weakness. Any advice for that?
Very good point. Most criminals are looking for the path of least resistance. They want the easiest victim to victimize, and the easiest person to victimize. And so when we're out in public, thanks for bringing it up, I think that we send nonverbal communication all the time. We send it, we receive it, and so one nonverbal communication, if you think about it, when you're out in public, I want people to walk with confidence. I want people to walk with purpose, with those shoulders back, with awareness. They're seeing things, and they're walking with a little bit of an attitude that I'm going to be a handful. If you think you're going to come up and make me a victim of a crime, I want to send good, strong, positive, nonverbal messages out there. So, in conjunction with removing the visible target, if there's a woman out there carrying a purse, let's remove the reason why they're going to come up to you and make you a victim of a crime. But when we're walking across a parking lot or any other public venue, let's show them, let's show people that we've got confidence, and again, we're walking with purpose and direction, and we're strong. we're going to show strength out there in public, and I think that's a very good point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just was thinking about that. The other thing, Steve, I think was when you're a woman or man, whoever, one of the things that you said to me is very important is be aware of your surroundings. Be aware, especially if you're coming out at night. You know, you're in a hurry, you're in a rush, you got a bunch of packages. The thing that you said to me that stood out from everything was just beware.
Beware.
Because you don't, yeah. And, you know, we're not trying to say this is a city under siege or anything like that. It's
No,
not. But again, you just have to, like you said.
I agree. And actually showing awareness is a layer of protection. And what we're trying to do is get people to layer on as many layers possible. And showing awareness, in other words, again, some nonverbal communication, we can't sneak up on you. And that applies in public, that applies in the residential community as well.
Okay, I think those are all great tips. Steve, you know, we mentioned some tips when you're shopping and out in public, and I think these are some other great safety tips while driving in our community. What are safety tips there? Because, you know, again, Steve, I'm going to say that we have some, you know, great drivers here, but,
Right.
you know, per capita in the union, we also have some of the worst, let's be
Right.
honest.
Yeah,
so
that's
what do you
right.
got, what do you got
You
there?
know, some very fundamental things. We could make that a whole topic in itself. But I think that when we're out there driving in the community, I think we should drive with our doors locked. I mean, we don't go to bed at night without locking our doors, so let's think about things like that. In that kind of an environment, let's lock our doors. Another thing that I do is, let's say you're at a stoplight and there's a car in front of you. A lot of people just roll their car right up to the car in front of them. In other words, they're leaving very little room to maneuver. And so if somebody were to walk up to your vehicle or, you know, what have you, you're reduced on your response. And then the other thing is, when you come up to that point, I think you should be as aware of your surroundings stopped at a stoplight as you would walking in a parking lot. So just understand that, is it normal to have people standing near the roadway? Is it, whether they've got a sign or what have you, that's not a normal thing. People walk on sidewalks, they don't hang out along the curb and that kind of thing. So very simply, fortify your environment, leave some room to maneuver, and be aware of your surroundings, and so you've got more time to respond and utilize that maneuver distance. The other thing, that if you think you're being followed, I give out this one basic suggestion. Make 4 consecutive right turns. If you're aware of your surroundings and you keep looking in your rearview mirror and you think somebody's following you for whatever reason, if you made 4 consecutive right turns and that person's still back there, I think it's time to escalate your response. And so those are some very simple things that people can do when we're out there driving.
The other thing is too, I think with these new cars, you know, some of them have that equipment where you can just, you know, hit a button and somebody's notified. That's one. The other thing is a lot of people have cell phones. We're not saying, you know, to talk while you're driving. You're not supposed
Right.
to, but some people have the Bluetooth and, you know, you can talk on
That's
the speaker.
right.
So, you know, those 4 consecutive turns would tell you, right turns would
That's
tell you
right.
something.
We saw it, we sensed it, we followed through enough by making 4 turns to understand that yes, we have a problem. And there's all kinds of ways to escalate. We don't. It is against city ordinance to drive while using a hands-held cell phone. But listen, if someone is afraid and they think that they and their family are in a bad position, I think we're going to understand in certain environments to use that cell phone. And I will caution people that some cell phones have a terrific GPS device. If you're going to use a cell phone, some phones don't. So the main message there is be as accurate as you can about your location when you're using a cell phone.
And some people panic, and that's something that's important.
Right.
And we're going to move on to this next question, but I want to ask you about, you mentioned, and we've seen an increase in the last decade of people standing by the roads with the signs. I mean, how many do we have in Albuquerque? We don't know. It's quite a few. Not normal behavior, and again, you know, most of the people that, again, you know, some of them have, I'm sure, good intentions, good hearts, but the ones with the signs, you know, again, I see it every day. You know,
Yeah.
people stopping, and I go home on the way, and there's one guy waiting, you know,
Sure.
for so your advice, again, is the same thing as the ones in the parking lot that you see. Same thing, same advice, right?
Same advice. Don't roll down your window. Don't give them money. It's the same fundamental concept. If you truly want to help them, let's figure out other ways to do that.
Okay, great answer there, Steve. Now, great tips on driving and being in the neighborhood, shopping, things like that. How can we create a safer, more secure environment at home? And that's, you know, we mentioned the car, we mentioned being out in public.
Sure.
But this is our home base here. What do we do there?
That's right. Some of the fundamental crime prevention concepts will apply in that environment as well. We want to remove targets from view. We want to reduce opportunities, and we can apply those concepts at home. So, it's about locks and lights and windows and doors and trimming bushes down so we can see and our neighbors can see us. Many times we can start with the front door. I mean, if we're talking about residential burglary, a lot of the residential burglary attempts start off with a knock at the door. Because typically they don't want to deal with people, they just want to get your TV or your identity from inside your home or what have you. So they might knock at the door and they might see if anybody's home. And my first recommendation is don't ignore the knock at the door, because if you do that, there was a time a few decades ago that we had a lot of legitimate door-to-door solicitation as a for instance.
Gosh, that's gone by the wayside.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we just don't have that much anymore, but many of our viewers might have grown up in that time, and so they think maybe the knock at the door is just someone trying to sell them something. And back in the times, maybe we just didn't answer the door because we didn't want to deal with that. That is a recipe for potential disaster now. So what I tell people is respond to the knock at the door. And I'm not suggesting necessarily open that door to expose yourself, to that person, but acknowledge the door to some degree. If you have a nice security screen door and you know it's locked and you've got that barrier between you and that person, maybe you can open the door and just enough to tell them, please leave. I'm not interested, please leave my front porch. But if you don't, maybe you're in an apartment or a home without a security door, you can yell through the door. My main point is to let them know someone is home. And I think that's the biggest thing that we could do. And if we tell them to please leave, Ed, I want them to go to the window. And don't go back and do what they're doing. I want them to kind of hold for compliance. Make sure that that person is doing what I've asked them to do. I've asked them, please leave my property. And so I'm going to go to a window and make sure that they've done that. And if they do anything that I don't think is all that normal or it's potentially suspicious, I'm going to get on the phone immediately and either call 242 cops or 911 and give a good description of that person. These knocks at the door have potential danger involved, so that's first and foremost. Now, the typical residential burglary might, after they decide that no one is home, they might just step back and kick in the door if they don't have a nice security screen door. So let's fortify our doors and windows. And sometimes it can be very simple. Sometimes we can put long screws in the deadbolt strike plates because oftentimes the strength of your deadbolt of your front door is in the length of the screws that's attached to the door frame. So let's get long screws. They get into the door frame, into the 2x4s, the actual strength of that door, and it's much more difficult. Windows. We make sure that windows have good operational locks on them, but we can add secondary locks to all windows. Little thumb screws in the railings. There's all kinds of ways. We can put dowel rods in windows and sliding glass doors. Doggy doors have turned into a potential problem. We have a lot of access points through doggy doors in today's world. And I know we love our animals and we want to make it convenient for them to step outside. I would want everyone here that if they have a doggy door to reevaluate that and make sure that we can lock it when we're not there at night and those kinds of things, or not install one completely. Multiple layers of protection. We're going to add security screen doors to front and back. We're going to fortify our windows and doors. Lighting is a huge issue. Sometimes over the years we've gone back and forth. Do we light things? We keep the lights on all night. I think we should light those areas that we would typically be all night. Front porches, back porches, sidewalks, garage doors, driveways. These are places that you and I that live there, this is where we're typically going to be. So I want those lights on at all times. I want my neighbors to be able to view my property as well. I want to be able to look outside and see what's going on outside if I hear a bump in the night. Motion lights can be very valuable on maybe the sides of our homes, those places that we wouldn't typically be at 1 o'clock in the morning. But if we have motion lights and the light comes on, then that puts us on notice. That puts us on alert that maybe there's something going on out there.
Well, it's, you mentioned a lot of great things there, and a real quick story for me. I remember being at home about 3 or 4 years ago at Saturday morning, get a knock at the door. They didn't see any cars in the driveway. I go to the door, and it's, I had a layer between us, though, the door, and I think that layer you mentioned is very important. And I'm like, yes. And the guy's, oh, I caught him off guard. We're looking for used batteries. Yeah, I knew what was going on because they had a van and they were getting ready to ransack the whole place or the whole neighborhood.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
because if they're looking to break into your house and they knock and you respond, don't they have to justify the reason that they're standing there? So they're going to start making something up.
Caught them totally
they're
off
looking
guard.
for someone's house. They lost their dog. They got to say something because they're certainly not going to say, "Oh, I was going to break into your house. Sorry."
Yeah,
right.
So I was real stunned by that, but we avoided that with that barrier, maybe some peepholes, ideas at the door too, to see who's out there. I think that's another thing. Real quick, we got about a minute left, Steve. I was hoping we'd get to some attempted scams. We won't be able to do that, but can you wrap this whole thing up for us? Your advice, your things that you mentioned on the show.
Absolutely. The scams. If someone initiates contact with you, Ed, and they want to give you something or ask something from you, in today's changing world, that's a scam. So I want everybody to understand, if they get a phone call, if they get an email, and someone's trying to scare them or give them some information, don't buy into that. It used to be okay. So what we're going to do in any environment, we're going to be more aware of our surroundings, we're going to trust our instincts, and we're going to follow through, and we're going to learn to control our environment. And if anybody wants to discuss any of these topics more, please give me a call. I'm the crime prevention manager. You can find my number, and I would love to talk to him about it.
The other thing too is on the phone too. On the phone, if things sound too good, they probably are.
That's exactly right.
You guide yourself with those and guard yourself and be safe.
That's
all things we talked about.
Don't believe them.
Okay. Steve Sneak, Manager, APD Crime Prevention Unit. Thanks so much for being our guest.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ed.
You bet. For the Department of Senior Affairs, I'm Ed Nunez.